Russia has accused Ukraine of making further attempts at breaching its border in the Kursk and Belgorod regions. The attacks were said to have occurred during a 3-day ceasefire declared by Russian President Vladimir Putin to mark victory in World War II. Ukraine has called the truce a farce, proposing instead a 30-day pause in fighting. Ukraine also pointing fingers at Russia for repeatedly breaching its own ceasefire. Ukrainian officials in the Zaporizhzhia region say Russian forces have hit 8 villages more than 200 times since that truce went into effect this week. Russia is celebrating 80 years since the then Soviet Union's victory in World War II. The annual military parade taking center stage in Moscow with President Vladimir Putin alongside other leaders. Dasha Chernyshova has more from Moscow.
Addressing the military parade in Moscow's Red Square, Russian President Vladimir Putin said Moscow will always remember and appreciate the heroism of the Soviet people who fought in World War II. President Putin said Russia won freedom and peace for all mankind at the cost of millions of lives. He said Russia is united by worshipping the generation that won the Great Patriotic War. And he insisted that the complete defeat of Nazism was achieved by the joint efforts of many countries and that Moscow highly appreciates the contribution of the Allied armies to the victory. As military hardware rolled through Red Square, almost 30 heads of states attended the parade. Vladimir Putin was sitting next to China's President Xi Jinping and veterans of World War II. For the first time in history, a column of drones, Gerань, Harpy, Lancet were presented at the parade. They were transported past the Kremlin in army trucks. At the parade, Putin met members of the North Korean military, while North Korean leader Kim Jong-un made a rare visit to the Russian embassy in Pyongyang to celebrate Russia's Victory Day. Dasha Chernyshova, CNA, Moscow.
For more on the Russia-Ukraine war, we're joined by former Ukrainian Prime Minister Arseniy Yatsenyuk. He's speaking to us from the Kyiv Security Forum in Ukraine. Mr. Yatsenyuk, we're hearing there from our correspondent in Moscow. So that line from Russia's president, you be very clear that the war in Ukraine is not just a kinetic war involving weapons and ammunition. It has also become very clearly a war in narratives.
Well, maybe it's a war in narratives, but Ukrainians are paying with their blood and flesh. This war is in human lives. Ukrainians lost hundreds of thousands of people due to unprovoked illegal Russian aggression against Ukraine. And your correspondent just mentioned that it was Russia who won in the Second World War. It is not true. The truth is that it was Soviet Union and Allied forces who won this righteous fight against the Nazis. And you know that Ukrainians lost 6 million of people in the Second World War. And Ukraine is one of those who actually defeated Nazis. And what happened today? War criminal Vladimir Putin, he is hosting a parade, but actually Putin is a present-day Hitler. As he waged the war against an innocent people, he is killing my fellow Ukrainians with only reason. He wants just to restore the Soviet Union.
All right, Mr. Yatsenyuk, whatever the truth may be, and I think as far as figures go, so that figure for Ukrainian loss of life in World War II, and generally Ukraine is careful, rightfully so, about releasing figures lost in the last 3 years of the war against Russia. But I think Volodymyr Zelensky, that's the president, has said, he said in February that 46,000 Ukrainian soldiers have lost their lives since February 2022. So significant loss of life here. But it is important, narratives. So loss of life is one thing, but winning the war also means winning support. And it is significant that you have, alongside Vladimir Putin, another leader who is head of the world's second largest economy. So support matters, narratives matter. How is Ukraine selling its story to make sure that a very important partner, that's the US, stays on side to keep its support for Kyiv?
With all due respect, you've mentioned the issue of truth. The truth is the truth. It's either black or white. So I want to reiterate once again that Ukrainian people lost 6 million people in the Second World War. In terms of the narratives and the support, you're absolutely right in saying that, look, President Xi decided to participate at this parade in the Red Square. And this is a clear sign that Putin is not alone, and that China actually supports this illegal and unjustified war against Ukraine. And let me remind you that yesterday both Putin and President Xi, they issued a joint statement and they gave a joint press conference when they said that they are friends in steel. I can hardly imagine how the Chinese government and Chinese people can support an annihilation of the Ukrainian nation, which is the state goal of Vladimir Putin. But we are not alone as Ukrainians. Let me remind you that Putin expected to take over Ukraine in 3 days. Russia's army is one of the biggest one in Europe, and it's a nuclear state. But it's been practically 3 years, but an invasion even started 11 years ago when Putin failed to take over Ukraine. And it's due to our joint efforts, mainly to the Ukrainian military, underpinned by our Western friends in supply of weaponry, ammunition, and financial support. So it is not about the narratives. It is about right or wrong. It's about lives of innocent people. And it's about actually the humanity. Whether we, as an independent nation, have the right to exist. Yes, we do. We have this right to exist. And we're gonna fight like hell for our annihilated right.
All right, Mr. Yatsenyuk, as you say, you cannot believe how it's possible that the Chinese president could be lending public support to the Russian president. Nevertheless, that is what we are seeing. But more importantly, Ukraine needs to secure the fact that the U.S. continues to support its existence as a sovereign state. We are not seeing for Ukraine that would be a reason for some relief. Any senior U.S. officials that we know of attending this victory parade in Moscow, and that could have happened given the rather surprising rapprochement between Moscow and Washington. How would you rate U.S. support for Ukraine right now?
Well, the U.S. administration, that's not the first U.S. administration that tries to reset the relations with Russia. And it's a kind of vicious cycle. And Americans always face the same consequences of this kind of reset policy. And this is to happen this time. My gut feeling is that President Trump has realized that Putin tries to outplay him. President Trump was very clear, saying that he is eager to cut the deal and to get at least 30 days ceasefire agreement, unconditional ceasefire agreement. But Putin is just cheating, and that's not the way President Trump is to accept this kind of policy. So he doesn't want to be humiliated, and he will never allow to do this. That's my take. And it's really good that there is no Americans on the Red Square. And even the better thing today is that President Trump just issued a few hours ago a very strong statement in support of Ukraine. There was some tension between Ukraine and the United States, but we managed to get along, and the mineral deal that has been signed by the United States and Ukraine paved the way for both political and economic and military cooperation. So we are back on track with the United States as of now.
All right, military cooperation. Of course, what Ukraine wanted was an explicit and formal security guarantee, which was, let's face it, from the very outset, very unlikely. So what it has instead is implicit, and perhaps no less important, the fact that the U.S. would be having people and resources on the ground. It has reason to protect its interests. Do you see that as a sufficient security guarantee for Ukraine to maintain its existence?
The only durable and strong and ironclad security guarantee I see is the Article 5 of NATO treaty. So we had been promised to join NATO in 2008, and at that time, as a Speaker of the House, I even co-signed the letter asking for the membership action plan for NATO. And in Bucharest in 2008, NATO promised that the time will come when Ukraine is to become NATO member state. The incumbent U.S. administration is not as supportive as the previous one in terms of Ukraine membership perspective. But once again, we still have a legally binding obligation of NATO member states to make Ukraine a NATO member. But in order to get to this kind of goal, first we need to win the war. And I expect that we need to double down on the efforts of the entire free world, mainly of the European Union and Americans, to deliver weaponry and to provide the financial support to Ukraine in order to stop the war and to deter Russians. And the next step will be to get an ironclad security guarantees, whether it is to be bilateral or multilateral, in order to reach our ultimate goal. And the ultimate goal is to be the NATO member. This is the plan we see.
All right, thanks for that. Looking beyond the US to the European Union and the NATO Article 5 Mutual Defense Treaty. Thanks for that, Mr. Arseniy Yatsenyuk. He's former Ukrainian Prime Minister from 2014 to 2016. He's also chairman and founder of the Kyiv Security Forum.